you are the one behind all this.
You want to hear the truth? Yes. We've been operating under the radar for years. The hospital, the government, we've kept this secret from the world.
Father hides a camera in daughter's coffin. What he found out left him in shock. When Ifyorapan loses his 10-year-old daughter, Princess, under mysterious circumstances, he refuses to accept the official explanation. Driven by grief and suspicion, he takes the desperate step of installing a hidden camera in her coffin. What the footage reveals shakes him to his core, unraveling a harrowing truth and igniting a relentless fight for justice. Sit tight and watch this story to the end, as you'll be left speechless and wondering. Ifyorapan's life has been a quiet one until one night his 10-year-old daughter, Princess, disappeared. The hospital had told him it was an accident, that she died of an unexpected medical complications. But Ifyo couldn't accept that. He couldn't understand how his healthy, bright daughter had gone from playing outside to cold and lifeless in the blink of an eye. As the day passed, Ifyok's grief turned into suspicion. Something didn't feel right. Princess had been in perfect health. She'd been the light of his life. But no one could give him a clear answer about what had happened to her. No one was offering real explanations, just excuses and vague statements from the doctors. He didn't know what to believe anymore. Then, a thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. What if Princess was still alive? What if the doctors were hiding something? Desperation and grief led him to an extreme decision. He had a hidden camera placed in her coffin before the funeral. He couldn't bear the thought of never knowing the truth. He had to know what really happened to his daughter. The grave had been silent for 2 days. Then, on the third night, the coffin moved. Ifyorapan had been sitting in the darkened room, staring at the laptop screen when he saw it. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, that his grief had twisted reality. But no, there it was, clear as daylight, on the hidden camera he had placed inside his daughter's coffin. The cheap wooden lid trembled slightly, a faint sound escaping through the soil. Not the sound of a lifeless body settling, not the creak of shifting earth. It was a scratch, slow, deliberate and desperate. His heart hammered against his ribs. He played back the footage, played it again, and the sound repeated. Then he watched in frozen horror. A shadow passed over the lens inside the coffin. Something was down there, something alive. Now, as he watched the footage in horror, his mind raced. Was it possible? Had they buried his daughter alive? He needed to act, but he had to be smart. If he rushed to the grave in the dead of night and started digging, people would think he had gone mad. He needed proof. He needed to see more. He took a deep breath, pressing his trembling fingers to the laptop keyboard. He fast-forwarded through the footage, scanning every second. The scratching sound had stopped, but the shadow remained. And then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., the coffin shook violently. Ifyok's throat tightened. He wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers and leaned closer to the screen. The camera had night vision, making everything inside the coffin appear in eerie shades of grey. Princess lay motionless, her little hands folded on the chest. But above her, in the coffin cramped space, the shadow moved again. Then, clear as day, tiny fingers pressed against the lens. Ifyok's chair scraped against the floor as he stumbled back. He gasped, heart pounding. It wasn't Princess' hand. It was something else, something smaller, something bony. Then, a slow whispering sound filled the coffin. Ifyok's breath itched. The whispers were too faint to make out, but they were real. Someone or something was speaking to his daughter's body. His fingers trembled over the keyboard. Should he stop watching, call someone, go to the grave himself? Then, the whispering stopped abruptly. The coffin lid groaned, and in that instant, the camera feed cut to black. No, Ifyok shouted, shaking the laptop as if that would bring the footage back. His wife, Ekaite, stared in their bed. What is it? She mumbled. Nothing, he lied, his voice hoarse. He couldn't tell her, not yet. Not until he knew exactly what was happening. Ifyok grabbed his phone and checked the live feed again. Nothing. The connection was lost. That was it. He couldn't sit here any longer. He had to go to the grave. The village cemetery was 20 minutes drive away. Ifyok's hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His headlights carved a lonely path through the dirt road, the night swallowing everything beyond. His mind raced. What if it really was Princess? What if she had been buried alive? But no, that couldn't be. He had seen her body. He had touched her cold skin. She was gone. Then, what had he just witnessed? He parked a short distance from the cemetery and climbed out, his breath misting in the cold air. The place was silent except for the distant hoot of an owl. He swallowed hard and walked towards Princess's grave, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The fresh mound of soil looked undisturbed, but Ifyok wasn't fooled. He dropped to his knees, brushing his fingers over the dirt. Then he saw it. Small, claw-like marks near the headstone, like something had been trying to claw its way in. Ifyok's heart lurched. His hands dug into the dirt, pushing it aside frantically. He didn't care if anyone saw him. He needed to know. The deeper he dug, the more his panic grew. The soil was damp, heavy. His fingers hit wood. Then, without warning, the coffin moved. Ifyok fell back, his breath choking him. He scrambled away, eyes wide. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The coffin shook again, and then a sound. A soft, wet giggle. Ifyok's mind reeled. He knew that laugh. It was Princess's, but it wasn't right. It was distorted, hollow. "Daddy," a small voice whispered from the coffin. Ifyok's vision blurred. His hands clenched into fists. His daughter was dead. This was not real. Then the coffin lid cracked open. Just a silver. A single tiny eye peered through the gap. Not Princess's. Something else. Ifyok stumbled to his feet, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He didn't know whether to flee or pry the coffin open completely. His body shook. His mind screamed at him to leave. But then, from inside the coffin, the voice came again. Daddy, help me. Ifyok's knees buckled. He had to be hallucinating. He had to be losing his mind. But the coffin, it was moving. And the whisper, it sounded so much like Princess. Then something crawled out. It wasn't his daughter. It was something much smaller, thin, hairless. Its skin was stretched tight over tiny bones. Its eyes black, soulless, locked onto him. Ifyok choked on a scream. He stumbled backward, but the creature moved fast towards him on all fours. "Daddy!" It rasped again. He turned and ran. His feet pounded against the dirt as he sprinted towards his car. He didn't dare look back. He could hear it behind him. He reached his car and yanked the door open. Just as he threw himself inside, something slapped against the window. A tiny hand. His breath itched. He dared to look up. The creature was grinding. Ifyok's shaky fingers fumbled with the ignition. The car roared into life, but the thing just stood there, its head tilting unnaturally to one side. Then it whispered something, a single word: "Stay." Ifyok drove all the way home without stopping. He locked every door, every window, but it didn't help. The whispers followed him. Ifyok sat frozen, his eyes locked on the laptop screen. The hidden camera inside Princess's coffin had come back to life. His daughter's lifeless body lay still, wrapped in the white burial cloth. But beside her, hunched and grinding, was the thing. It had crawled out of her grave only moments ago, yet here it was again, inside the coffin, as if it had never left. Thank you for watching to this point. Please kindly hit on the subscribe button as we continue. Ifyok's throat went dry. The creature lifted one skeletal hand and slowly waved at the camera. Then the screen went black again. He grabbed his phone and called the hospital. His fingers were shaking. The moment someone picked up, he demanded to speak to the doctor, who had handled Princess's case. "I need my daughter's full medical report right now." A long silence. Then the doctor sighed. "Mr. Akpan, I told you before, your daughter had an undetected..." "I want the truth," Ifyok snapped. Another pause. Then, in a low voice, the doctor said, "Meet me at the hospital in an hour." Ifyok sped through the empty streets, his mind racing. If the hospital had nothing to hide, why were they avoiding his questions? He packed and stormed inside. The doctor was waiting in one of his offices, his expression grim. He locked the door before speaking. "You were never supposed to see the report," he murmured. Ifyok's stomach clenched. "Why?" The doctor exhaled sharply. "Because your daughter wasn't the first." Ifyok's fingers tightened into fists. "What do you mean?" The doctor rubbed his temples. 3 other children died under similar circumstances in the past 6 months. Perfectly healthy, no prior illness. They just died. Then Ifyok asked, "Why was the cause of death listed as heart failure?" "Because their bodies were empty," the doctor whispered. Ifyok felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What?" The doctor hesitated. Then, lowering his voice even more, he said, "Their organs were missing." Ifyok's vision blurred with rage. "You are telling me someone took my daughter's organ?" The doctor nodded slowly. "Not just hers, the other 3 children too." Ifyok's hands shook. "Then what the hell did we bury?" The doctor swallowed. "That's the thing, Mr. Akpan. The bodies weren't normal. They were hollow, like something else had taken their place. A sick feeling churned in Ifiok's stomach. The thing he saw in the coffin, the thing that crawled out, it wasn't his daughter. It was something else. He grabbed the doctor's collar. Who is behind this? The doctor's face paled. I don't know, but he hesitated. All the children were treated by the same surgeon before they died. Who? Ifiok shouted. The doctor swallowed hard. Dr. Okon. Ifiok stormed out of the office. His mind was wild with anger and rage. He had to find this Dr. Okon. He pulled out his phone and searched for the surgeon's name. The man responsible for his daughter's death had disappeared? He clenched his jaw. He needed more answers. If Dr. Okon was gone, someone else had to be involved. And there was only one place left to check. The morgue. Ifiok drove straight to the hospital morgue. He had no official permission, but he didn't care. He needed to see Princess's body with his own eyes. The morgue was eerily quiet. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something rotten. He walked past rows of cold storage compartments. Then he found the one labeled Princess Apan. His fingers trembled as he pulled it open. The body inside was not his daughter's. The face was hers, but the skin was wrong. Too smooth, too stiff, like a mask stretched over an empty shell. His stomach turned. He reached out with shaking hands. The moment his fingers touched the skin, the body collapsed into itself like dry paper crumbling into dust. Ifiok staggered back. His daughter had never been in this morgue. Whatever was buried in her grave, it wasn't human. A noise behind him made him spin around. Footsteps. Someone was in the morgue with him. Ifiok's pulse pounded as he turned toward the sound. A figure emerged from the shadows. An old man, dressed in a hospital gown. Dr. Okon? Ifiok whispered. The man gave a weak smile. You finally figured it out. Rage surged through Ifiok. What did you do to my daughter? Dr. Okon sighed. Not me. Them. Ifiok's body tensed. Who? Dr. Okon's eyes darkened. The ones who live beneath. Ifiok felt his stomach drop. Beneath? Where? The doctor nodded. They take what they need, and in return, they leave behind replacements. Ifiok's breath caught. He thought of the thing in Princess's coffin, the whispering, the crawling, the empty body in the morgue. He shook his head. No, this is crazy. Dr. Okon chuckled. Is it? He pointed at the morgue's exit. Go home, see for yourself. But Ifiok, who was already angry, stormed towards the old man, and it disappeared like dust. Then, when it all clicked, the truth he had refused to accept was now undeniable. The body in that coffin wasn't his daughter's. It had been replaced by something that wasn't human. Ifiok stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. Here was the supposed princess, right in his house. The thing on the bed still looked like his daughter. Her soft skin, her delicate fingers, the playful tilt of her head. But those black, soulless eyes told him the truth. This was not Princess. It blinked again, sideways. Then it asked, almost teasingly, "Are you going to tell?" Ifiok swallowed hard. His wife was still in the kitchen, humming a gospel song, unaware of the nightmare that had walked into their home. He had to decide, and fast. His mind raced. If he told his wife, would she believe him? If he kept quiet, could he live in the same house with it? Princess, no, the thing pretended to be her, tilted its head, watching him with an unnatural patience. Daddy, it whispered, too softly, too carefully. You don't look happy to see me. Ifyok's heart pounded. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a fight for survival. He had to find out what happened to his real daughter. Keeping his voice steady, he said, "Of course, I'm happy, Princess." The thing smiled. It knew he was lying. Yes, it knew. He forced himself to move, to breathe, to think. The hospital knew more than they were saying. The doctor had hinted at something sinister, an ancient force, a trade happening beneath the surface of the city. Ifyok needed to go back. He needed more answers. But first, he needed to get his wife out of the house. "Let's surprise mommy," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Go hug her from behind." The thing's grin widened, amused. "Okay, Daddy." It hopped off the bed, and as it walked past him, Ifyok felt the air turned ice cold. He followed closely, his hands shaking. The kitchen lights glowed warmly. His wife stood by the stove, still humming, stirring a pot of soup. She had no idea what was walking towards her, no idea what had come back home. Ifyok opened his mouth to warn her, to shout, to do something, but then the thing did something that froze him in place. It hugged her, gently, softly, just like Princess always did. His wife turned around laughing. "Ha, my baby, you scared me." She kissed the top of the thing's head. Ifyok's stomach churned. His wife didn't notice anything was wrong. "But what happened? Did this thing make my wife lose her memory? Didn't she remember?" The thing turned its head slowly and looked at Ifyok over his wife's shoulder. It smiled. It knew. It knew he wouldn't tell her. Not yet. That night, Ifyok couldn't sleep. His wife laid beside him, peaceful, but he sat up in bed staring at the darkness, listening. Somewhere in the house, something was moving. Something wasn't breathing right. The truth had to be found. He had to know where his daughter was, if she was still alive. The hospital, the morgue, the doctor, each step he'd taken had led him closer to something he wasn't prepared for. What were they really doing with the bodies? Why were these replacements showing up everywhere? And why was his daughter, his precious princess, the one to bear the brunt of these horrifying secrets? He freshened up and changed his clothes. He stepped out again from the house quietly and drove back to the morgue. He was ready to get answers, even if it meant dying for his daughter. The moment he stepped inside, the temperature dropped. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. A low laugh echoed in the darkness. Ifyok spun around, his heart racing. From the shadows, a figure stepped out. The doctor smiled coldly, his eyes empty of any warmth. "You came back again. You were not supposed to know this secret, but I gave you back, Princess. If you've come looking for answers, Ifyok, you are too late."
You are the one behind all this.
Ifyok growled. Dr. Khan's smile grew only wider.
You want to hear the truth? Yes. We've been operating under the radar for years. The hospital, the government, we've kept this secret from the world.
"If they've taken Princess," Ifyok said slowly, "then where is she now?" Dr. Okon didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes flickered to a door in the back of the room. "If you want to see your daughter again, you will have to come with me." Ifyok followed Dr. Okon through the narrow hallway, walking through a secret basement. The door creaked open. Inside the room, a massive tank stood in the center. It was filled with a dark liquid that seemed to pulse and shift. In the tank, a figure floated, Princess, but she wasn't moving. Her skin was pale, her eyes closed. She was floating, hooked up to machines. "If you want to see your daughter again, Ifyok, you will have to accept that she's not the same anymore. What you are looking at is not the girl you once knew. She's beyond human now." The door slammed shut behind him. Ifyok spun around, his heart in his throat. It wasn't Dr. Okon standing there anymore. It was Princess. She was standing, staring at him with those empty eyes. "Daddy, it's time to come home." Moral lesson. Some doors should never be opened. Some questions should never be asked, because the answers, they might tear you apart.